Hey there, it's Zach from Gadget, and we are here with the Sony NEX-F3. And so this is Sony's latest mirrorless camera. It's priced at about $599, including an 18 to 55mm kit lens, the same lens that has been included on past NEX models. It is very similar in design to the NEX-7, which is quite a bit pricier and a little bit bulkier, but it's more of a departure from the NEX-C3 than we were expecting to see, definitely, considering the price tag. And it does look quite similar to the NEX-7. So I have the NEX-C3 right here, just so that you can get an idea. It's a significantly larger camera. It almost seems like a step back from a design perspective, just because of the size, and let me reverse that there. The size and the design. So we'll go back to the NEX-C3 in a few minutes. Just wanted to give that, give you a heads up there about the design differences. But we will walk around the camera. I'm going to remove the lens just to make this a little easier. As you see here, we have a new APS-C sensor. There's even APS-C branding right down there. And so this is a 16 megapixel sensor. Over on the front, there's an extended grip. So compared to the NEX-C3, there's a lot more plastic here to grab a hold of. Then we have the shutter release on the front of the grip, rather than up top back here where it is on the NEX-C3. On the top, we have a power switch, a dedicated power toggle here, that is identical to the one that we have on the NEX-5N. And then going over to the back, we have a video record button, we have a playback button, this is new, we have a flash release. There's now a built-in pop-up flash right there. And then right above the flash release, we have a dedicated accessory port. This is a proprietary connector used for only Sony NEX accessories, such as a shotgun mic, and for the first time on the entry-level camera, you can also use the OLED EVF, electronic viewfinder attachment, by connecting it right up there. Back to the flash, since we mentioned that, it does come up quite a bit, so it can reach around the front of the lens, so you're not going to get any shadows from the front of the lens as long as you don't have the lens hood on. And so this is the lens hood right here. And you can either flip it around backwards like this, or just remove it altogether to avoid getting shadows from the front of the hood. So I'm going to take that back off, close up the flash, and then on the back we have a 3-inch LCD. I'll power this up right here. And so it's the same size and resolution as the NEX-C3, but we have a new articulating mount here. So if you'll notice, you can actually flip this forward 180 degrees. So I'll turn it like that just so that you can see. So we definitely weren't able to do this on the NEX-C3. Now you can actually flip the LCD 180 degrees facing front for self-portraits if you're the type that wouldn't mind taking a self-portrait with such a large camera. This is probably very exciting to you. The trade-off here is that we can no longer flip the LCD down. So with the NEX-C3, you could flip the LCD downward, like so, for shooting overhead shots. Here, we only have about 5 degrees or so of tilt. And so it's a huge difference. If you really can't shoot overhead shots the same way that we could do on the NEX-C3. And when you're outside in bright light, the viewing angles just aren't where they would need to be in order to get those shots. So you wouldn't be able to really frame it all that well. That's a bit of a disappointment to us, definitely. We really did enjoy that on the NEX-C3. Just to give you a look at the inside of the mount here, it is a bit different in design than the NEX-C3's. It feels fairly solid. I imagine you can move this in and out, thousands of times without having any issues. And I'll close that back up. We have a very similar control layout here on the back compared to the NEX-C3. So there is this main dial and the 2 buttons. These have custom functions as well, so you can configure these any way you'd like. I've set this to the bottom button to control white balance, for example. The right side toggles ISO, image sensitivity, and then the top one launches the menu, where we have our main menu. But get back to that in a second. Let me finish the tour. Over on the left side of the camera, we have up top is a USB connector. On the bottom is HDMI. So I'll close that back up. A little hard to open and close there. Okay, and now going over to the bottom, you'll notice that we have two different compartments here. One is for the battery, and a separate one for the SD card. Unfortunately, the placement is very similar to where it was on the NEX-F3, which means it's right next to the tripod socket. And the issue with that is if you have a tripod connected, as we do now on the NEX-F3 that we're using to shoot this video, you'd have to remove the plate in order to access either the SD card or the battery, which is a bit unfortunate, especially if you're going to be using a tripod for an extended period of time. The battery itself is identical to the batteries that we've seen on other NEX models. It is 1080 milliamp hours, and we were able to get about 1,000 or so still photos and about 20 minutes of video on a single charge there. So a very solid battery for sure. We just wish that it were off to the side a little bit so that we wouldn't have to remove the tripod plate to access the battery and the SD card slot. There is nothing here on the right side of the camera, so completely bare, just a grip right there. And now I'm going to go back into the menu here. Very similar user interface. So if you've used the NEX-F3, the NEX-7, the NEX-5N, or any of the older NEX models, it's going to look very familiar to you. As you've noticed, you may have noticed rather, the camera icon has changed, so it's no longer a representation of the NEX-F3. It looks more similar to the NEX-F3, which makes sense. Otherwise identical. You can turn off these little shooting tips right here that identify the different menu options. I haven't done that yet, so I'm just scrolling around to avoid them. But you can definitely turn that off. Shooting modes, we have a new shooting mode here, which is called Superior Auto. So we have two main auto modes. We have Superior Auto, which is represented by this little gold eye camera plus, and then Intelligent Auto, which you're probably already familiar with if you've used any NEX cameras before. Basically just an automatic mode with a fancy name. And then we have the Scene Selection mode, which is also another automatic mode. This one lets you manually choose scenes, so we can choose landscape, macro, sports action, sunset, night portrait, night scene. Handheld Twilight's pretty cool. It takes multiple frames, multiple exposures in low light, and combines them. So it underexposes, combines them to get the light from all of the images combined so that you can capture sharp images in low light. With this Eye Camera Plus, the Superior Auto mode, the camera will actually select between all of these scene modes that we just saw, depending on the scene that you're shooting. It also has an Auto HDR mode, which you may like or you may not like. We like to have a little bit more control over when the camera captures an HDR image. With this mode, it's going to shoot HDR whenever it wants to, basically. Whenever the camera decides that the scene dictates the need for HDR shooting, which is taking 3 different frames at multiple exposures and then combining the images in order to capture more information in the light and dark areas. Whenever the camera decides that the scene would benefit from having an HDR mode, it'll shoot an image in HDR, and there's really little warning to even keep the camera still, so it kind of just happens. Let's go back here. Otherwise, the menu is very similar to what we've seen on past NEX models, for better or worse here. So it does require a little bit of digging, especially in some of the menus like setup. Just scroll until you get to the option that you're looking for. Back over to image size. As I mentioned, it's a 16 megapixel sensor. Video modes, we have a new 1080p video mode, but unfortunately there's no access to 720p anymore. So we have a few different options. We have 1080 60i, 2 different sizes, then we have compressions rather. Then we have 1080 24p progressive frames, and that's probably the one that you're more interested in if you're looking for 1080p. That's an AVC HD, and then for MP4 we have we have a 1080i option, and then we have a VGA, which is a 640 by 480 option, which you probably will never use, but it's there nonetheless. Otherwise, very, very familiar menu options, nothing really to speak of there. Pretty straightforward stuff. So, from our experience, and the battery, it's just about dead right now, as you can see right there on the indicator. Really love the battery indicator here, though. Just like on all NEX cameras, it gives you a percentage readout, and that seems to be very accurate. So the battery does, you really know where you stand as far as the number of images or battery percentage that you have remaining. Going back over here, really nothing else has changed significantly. We can go up to ISO 16,000. We weren't able to do that before. So the top image sensitivity setting on the NEX-F3 had been 12,800. So we get a little bit more of a bump right here. If you want to go up to 16,000, you have that as an option, definitely. And so that's pretty much it as far as the design of the camera. Again, APS-C size sensor up front. Decent image, very solid image quality really with this camera, so it's quite in line with the NEX-F3. There's nothing really compelling us to upgrade from the NEX-F3. I mean, this is an excellent camera right here. The F3 is also a very solid device, but if we had a choice between the two of these at the same price, $599, we'd actually go with the C3, even though it's a year old at this point. But has much of the same functionality, and it's significantly smaller, more compact. Some people did complain that the lens didn't look proportionate with the NEX mounted on the NEX-F3, which may be why Sony opted to increase the size of its F3. But in general, we definitely don't mind the size here. It's quite nice to have such a compact camera. Rounded edges, you know, the grip is a little bit smaller, but it's not too small. And overall, we do like the NEX-F3 a little bit better than the NEX-F3. So if you have a choice, if you're able to find an NEX-F3, especially at a lower price, we'd opt for this over the F3. If you can't get an NEX-F3, can't really go wrong with the F3. We haven't had any issues with it at all. It's still a good value at $599, and that includes the standard kit lens as well. So again, for Engadget, this is Zach Koenig taking a look at the Sony NEX-F3.